Hi, and welcome to how to build a PC. So let's get started with parts, and then we're going to go over kind of our environment a little bit. So this is a working lab that you see, a little messy, but it's a working lab. So first of all, we're going to look at today's build as far as parts. Okay, this was a client that asked me to basically build a kind of a higher end photography computer. Now, this is a little bit of an overbuild, but this person, the last PC I built for him lasted 10 years, still going strong, but is having some issues. So we're going to do a little bit of an overbuild today, but hopefully it'll still be good that way. Okay. So we'll start off with, of course, something that's incredibly important, which is the case. Okay. So the case, while you shouldn't be spending $1 million on it, unless you want to, the case here that we have is a Fractal North XL. This is a beautiful case. This person is into a little bit of style, as it were, in old records. And when we get into the case, you'll see why I picked this particular case. So there's an aesthetic appeal, but it also has to be practical, meaning your case needs to fit all of the components. You need to look at airflow, what usage you're going to be using it in, what environment you're going to be using it in. All that's super, super important. So this is a fairly large case, but again, for this build, especially with the airflow, I think it's going to be a great case. So that is the case, and we'll be doing that. In addition, let's start off with our motherboard. So our motherboard here, this is an MSI. I would say my three favorite kind of models, as it were, brands of motherboards would be MSI. That's what this is. Asus and GIGABYTE. I think all three make excellent, excellent boards, and I've used them for many. I've built probably well over, I don't know, 500-600 builds at this point in my IT career, at least. So MSI, I usually actually like to get Asus. That probably is my #1 brand, but MSI is excellent as well. Notice that's a little unusual that you can tell this kind of a gaming board. This isn't. This is more of a workstation board, but sometimes I will actually build with gaming boards just because some of the parts sometimes are a little nicer. So that's not a bad way to go, but this is actually a pro version. This is one of their work boards, as it were, workstation boards, which is great. So this is going to be great. So we're going to have this. This is, when we look at this, this is X870. So what that means is that's the chipset. Okay, and then this has Wi-Fi. Really careful with this. A lot of people build a desktop computer and they automatically assume it has Wi-Fi, like laptops have Wi-Fi. That's not always true, so be careful. This one does have Wi-Fi. I'm not sure if my client wants it or not, but it's nice to have that convenient, and I've learned from in the past, sometimes it's just good to include it even if they don't want it. But the 870, the chipset's very, very important, okay? So we've got a couple different chipsets that we can use for this, and that's going to be paired with an AMD Ryzen 7, okay? So this is the Ryzen 7 series in particular. You can see here, this is going to be the 7800 right there. So this is the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. So the X means it can be overclocked. We're not going to really do that, but it tends to be the better die sets, which is really nice because if you get the X, the regular one, and a lot of people argue it's not worth the price. For this, it was a great price. So I had no problem doing it. But the X is super nice because, again, they tend to be a higher quality die, so the CPU to be able to overclock it. So even if you don't overclock, which we're not going to, I don't actually think it's a great idea to overclock. It can cause lots of instability issues, but it tends to be better performance than just stock. And the 3D refers to the type of actual cache RAM on here, which is huge, okay? We have our L1, L2 cache, which is usually SRAM. Okay, and that's big. So that's kind of part of that. This has the built-in Radeon graphics. We're not going to be using that, but you can see here, this is an 8-core, 16 threads. Each core has a thread. So this is going to be plenty of performance. 5 gigahertz max boost, 4.2 base. A little confusing when you see that. Basically, the 5 gigahertz max boost means that usually single core performance, okay? And that's what a lot of times you see advertised. And that's a little deceiving. Really, it's a 4.2 across all of your cores. Okay, so we've got that, which is great. And we're going to pair that motherboard and that CPU. Oh, and please be careful. A lot of your AMD CPUs now do not come with stock coolers. Okay, so that means you have to do something else. This tends to run a little hot. Again, I went, and this is 2025. This is the 7800 series. The 9000 series has already been out. But price-wise, I couldn't see a valid reason to upgrade to the 9000 series. There is, and we can get into, like, there's a little bit more performance, things like this, but at some point you also have to go, this isn't a gaming computer. Okay, so we're not looking at every frame per second or anything else that counts. We're also looking for basic performance. While this runs a little hotter than the 9000 series, and that is one thing that's great about the 9000 series, is their TPW, their total power, is frankly quite a bit lower in the 9000 series than the 7000 series. It's still a great performance deal. But because these run a little hot, and by a little hot, I mean it actually goes up to 90 degrees Celsius, which is crazy. If you've built for a long time, 80 used to always be the hard cap, but they're actually saying that 90 degrees Celsius is normal. So we are going to, which I normally don't say that you need it, but for this one, we are going to put some water cooling on. This isn't going to do anything severe because, again, this won't be pushed that often. There might be some light video editing happening, but even then, it should be fine. So it's only a 2-fan. A lot of times you'll see 3-fan, which is just going to be more maximizing the cooling, but this should still keep everything very cool, okay? And this is water cooling, so we'll be doing that. And we're going to pair that with a graphics card, and this is a 5070, so this is going to be great. This is 12 gigabytes of GDDR. This should be GDDR5, it could be GDDR6, but let's see, 12 gigabytes. This probably actually is yep, and it actually says right there. Wow. Okay, this is actually, so you can see right there, this is an RTX 5070, and it's a PCIe 5.0, which is the newest as of this writing. It is 12 gigabytes of GDDR7, which is absolutely amazing because we are going to be putting in GDDR5 into the computer, not GDDR. We're going to be putting DDR5 into the computer. Okay, so that is beautiful performance. And again, overkill, but one reason for video editing and such you might put in a nice video card is because it's going to have what the CUDA cores, and AMD can do it as well. Your two major, of course, GPU manufacturers, you're going to either get NVIDIA or AMD. That's it. Okay, but there's lots of video card manufacturers. So the GPU's only AMD or NVIDIA, but there's a ton of manufacturers that make the card that puts the GPU in. So this is a Gigabyte. Again, Gigabyte's a great brand. Asus is a great brand. NVIDIA's a great brand. There's quite a few. If you're looking at AMD, Sapphire is an excellent brand for AMD GPU chips. So you can kind of look at the different ones. And one of my favorite brands, actually, of video cards was EVGA. I think EVGA made absolutely top quality video cards. Unfortunately, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, they exited the video card market. And that's really is too bad. But, you know, the absence will still be felt. I've built many computers with EVGA. But Gigabyte's an excellent brand. If you're into, there's really going to be not a lot of RGB, but if you're into RGB, be a little careful because everybody has RGB. There are programs you can do to write to basically control the RGB on different manufacturers, but out of the box, Gigabyte's going to have their own form of RGB. This is an MSI motherboard, so if you actually want all the RGB to pair out of the box with one simple controller that's native, keep your motherboard and your video card the same brand. Kind of a helpful hint, okay? But we're not really doing RGB on this, so the Gigabyte and MSI will work just fine together. Yeah, the next thing we need is storage. So the storage here, this is going to be NVMe. This is Samsung, excellent brand. I'd say Samsung and WD are both excellent, but there's many other. Crucial makes great ones. Many brands, but Samsung's usually great. I actually want to get Pro. This is the Evo Plus, which means it's a little bit below the Pro level. The major difference between Evo Plus and your Pro level is going to be that this particular one will have less read and write cycles than Pro. Okay, so the Evo Plus is going to have less read and write cycles than the Pro, but again, it's unless you're really heavily using it, you're probably fine, and the price difference is quite a bit. Okay, so this is a PCIe 4 and 5, and this is a 4 terabyte M.2 NVMe. Okay, and that's important that it's NVMe, so it's not just running on the SSD channels, but this will actually run in the PCIe express lanes. So that is a beautiful, beautiful thing there. And we're going to also need some RAM. So we've got DDR5, this is Flare X. So this is going to be, this already is tuned for the AMD Expo. And this is running, you can see right back here, the RAM that we have here is G.SKILL Flare X, and this is DDR5. And you can see here that this is DDR5 5200. And it is 64 gigabytes of RAM. It's a lot of RAM, and probably not needed, but if you're going to build, sometimes it's nice to actually go to the next level. So this should last a long time. And this is 2 sticks of 32 gigs each. And these are your CLI timings and your voltage. These CLI timings are fairly high. A lot of gamers like lower CLI timings, but at the end of the day, that's just fine. And really, we're looking for stability. So we also need a power supply. So our power supply, and let's zoom out. Okay, so this is a super flower. So a couple of my favorite brands, I would say number one is Seasonic. I absolutely love Seasonic power supplies. They are an original manufacturer of power supplies. A lot of your power supply manufacturers do not make the power supplies themselves. There's only a couple companies in the world that manufacture pretty much everybody's power supplies. So a lot of them rebrand it and slap stuff on. But Seasonic is probably one of my favorite, but Superflower is very, very well known. You can see right there. Superflower makes an excellent power supply as well. This is a gold. This is 1,000 watts. That is way more than we need. But that 5070 and paired with the Ryzen 7, it's going to draw a good amount. So this is an overkill, but it's also for future builds. So you got to kind of look for that. This is the ATX 3.1. Okay, so that's a big deal. And PCIe 5.1 compatible. So this is kind of a brand new model, and this should perform very, very well. Now, in addition to that, this is something I'm now kind of, and this sounds horrible, but in many ways I'm actually requiring this of all of my clients, is for them to get a UPS. Okay, so this is a CyberPower, and you can see it's a CP1500. So this is going to deliver, this will be a UPS, and what this will do is actually deliver clean power. Okay, so you can see right there, that's the 1500, that's the one that we got. That's going to be 1,000 watts. So I'm matching that to the power supply. This is overkill, because remember, 1,000 watt power supply one, depending on whether it's gold, platinum, and the one that we got, by the way, is, and that is important to see, a gold, okay, which I think is the best value. There is a platinum. Unfortunately, the platinum, you're spending a lot more, and your performance ratio to cost, I don't think is worth it. I mean, if you want the best of the best, you can go for that, but I think gold is excellent. We're still performing at very, very high efficiency with the gold. So it's not like we're gonna hit 1,000, we'll hit close to 1,000, but we're also not going to be pushing 1,000 watts in the system. But what's nice about 1,000 watts is you can connect your monitor to this, maybe your router, things like this. So do not connect a laser printer. So one thing you can never connect to a UPS, but the client can connect a couple different things here and still power it just fine, okay? This has the Sinewave, which means it's nice, clean output. So this is an excellent addition, and as the computers are getting faster and more intricate, it's really, really important to get a UPS at this point, because this will help to make sure if you're building a beautiful, $1,000 plus computer, you're probably also going to want to make sure that you're protecting it, okay? And protecting it means making sure that there's, not just surges, because yes, this protects against surges, but this also protects against what we call brownouts, low power. Low power can be very dangerous for a computer too, and you won't even necessarily see it, okay? So we've got our UPS, which is of course very, very important. And a lot of people forget this, copy of Windows. Okay, so this is Windows 11 Pro. I would highly suggest if you're watching this video, it means you're interested in IT. If you're going to run Windows, again, if you want to run Linux, yay, I'm a huge Linux fan, but I mean, the practicality is most people are running Windows. Don't buy Home, okay, buy Pro. There's going to be lots of features like BitLocker, remote desktop that you want Pro for. Okay, so I'd buy Windows 11 Pro. So this is Windows 11 Pro and is version 24H2. This is OEM, which means you need to be an original equipment manufacturer. I do qualify as that. So there you go. The big difference between retail and this, one, is cost, and OEM is going to be quite a bit cheaper. But two, the other big difference is that you can't ask Microsoft for help. Okay, so if it's OEM, that means the person who built the computer needs to actually help you and service you for whatever, warranty you allow. So that's super important. So don't ever forget, the Windows copy. A lot of people do. Okay. So let's actually now, so we've got all of our stuff. Okay. And again, we have to have a case. Okay. So we've got the case. We have to make sure we have a motherboard. We have to make sure that we have a CPU to go with the motherboard. We need to make sure that the CPU and motherboard are compatible, okay? Not just whether it's LGA and PGA, but we also need to make sure that it's compatible in the sense that the same chipset and everything else, the same socket type and the same chipset, okay? We also need to make sure that we have storage device. We also need to make sure we have RAM. We need to make sure that we have a video card, okay? Unless we're using onboard video. Some have, some don't. This particular one does have onboard video, but we're gonna make a separate dedicated GPU and video card for that. Make sure if your CPU does not come with a fan, check for that to make sure that you buy a fan of some sort, whether it's air or water cooling like this. Make sure you have a power supply, okay? All things that's super important. Okay, so let's put some of this away. Okay, let's also talk about our environment, a little bit of cleaning, okay? So let's talk a little bit about our environment. So basically, yes, this is a working lab, and there's some things that are a little messy, but there's a lot of things I'm doing right here. One, this is a desert area, so static electricity is super, super important, meaning not to have it. Static electricity is very common here, okay? So a couple things that we have is, one, if you look around, you can see that this is carpet. Carpet is absolutely the worst thing for you to build on because static electricity is real. Remember, 100 volts can destroy electronics. Even if it doesn't destroy it right away, it can cause long-term damage, okay? Where we don't feel static electricity, we start hitting 3,000 to 5,000 volts. So by the time you feel static electricity, your parts are already potentially have damage. Okay, so we want to make sure we protect that. One thing, if you can work on concrete, something like that, that's great. This, because it's carpet, I am standing on a special piece of carpet, okay? So this is specially to help dissipate static electricity. And that's what we're doing. A lot of people say grounds you. It does not ground you, okay? Instead, you have electricity flowing from a positive to negative pattern, negative to positive, okay? When there's disparity of voltage, electricity is going to flow, okay? So what we want to actually do is even our voltage. So that's what we're doing. Again, people say ground, but you're not grounding. We're causing our voltage to become even. This has little pieces of metal and things like this put in to help do it. So I'm actually standing on one of these, okay? So if you have to work on carpet, make sure you do that, okay? The other thing is, in addition, this mat that you see here, this is an anti-static mat, okay? So this will go in and ideally clip this to something near you. It should be metal, okay? And that'll also help to dissipate the static electricity or equalize your environment and you to the static electricity around, okay? And then, of course, while we work, what's very, very important is the anti-static wrist strap. Okay. Now, if this seems like overkill, it is. If I'm building a computer for someone, I don't want to pay for the parts, and I can't make them. Okay. So that's all critical things. Now, we're going to start with the case. So with the case, the first thing that we need to do is, of course, pop out the case. And then as far as the anti-static wrist strap, we do not need it right now because I'm not dealing with any sensitive electronics. Okay. So let's get the case going. One thing you're going to do is flip it upside down. Okay, so I'm just going to pull back all of these, and we're going to flip. Okay. Now, a little trick here, and I know this is probably a little close, but you got your flaps, right? Take your flaps and push them out. And those flaps are to help you hold the box, but they'll get stuck in the case. So if I flip these out, I can pull the box off just like this. And make sure that you're not at any time throwing the box out or anything else. Never throw boxes out until you know it works. So we're gonna flip it up. And take off that piece of styrofoam. And that piece, luckily this is actually not styrofoam, but it is a nice foam, okay? And then we have the plastic. So we're gonna take off the plastic. Let's turn this right side up. Cut it a little bit here, there we go. And again, I'm trying to be very gentle with all the packaging, okay? So let's move this over here. And that way you can get our first look at this case, which I'm very, very excited to build, okay? So you can see here, this has kind of a mesh, okay? And so it'd be a very, very nice build. We have a mesh here that's gonna show through. Again, a lot of times with gaming, people like it to be, you know, the solid glass and things like that, which is fine. We're just not doing this because this person, again, really loves albums and records. So I think this will give a nice piece to it. Also look at this beautiful wood front, okay? So again, very excited. If we look at the top, we can see that we've got a power button here, okay? We've got our headphone jacks, our microphone jack, 2 USB 3 and a USB-C. I think today that's a pretty well standard build. You can get more USB, a lot of times they'll include 2, but honestly, USB 3 is backwards compatible, so why not just get USB 3, okay? So that's a beautiful one right there, and then USB-C, okay? Okay, so with this, we need to start looking at getting out, let's open it first, okay? So I'm gonna look right here, and on the back here, it looks like I have some screws, okay? So, we're gonna remove the screws back here because we wanna take off the side, okay? So, this is a ratchet screwdriver, okay? Be very, very careful with ratchet screwdrivers. Ideally, I'm only gonna use this on the outside of the case. We should not be using it inside because you can over torque. The torque on this is a lot more because of the ratchet. So you can end up tightening things too tight inside. So really, this should only be used on the outside of a case unless you're really, really careful. So we're gonna try to remove these screws in the back. So let's do that. Okay, and this just comes off like this, okay? And we've got a nice little seal all the way in the back, so that's very nice. And we're gonna go ahead and just set this off to the side because we're not gonna be using that for right now, okay? And let's go ahead and take off the other side as well. And this is just a simple slide, and that would be the back. Okay, now that we have both sides open, and we're gonna want that to be able to get to the back and everything, we've got some nice cable management, which is really nice. You can look right here. We can see we've got some areas, some holes to be able to route our cables, which is great. Plus, we already have, this are front panel connectors, okay? So you can see the front panel connectors, we have our USB-C, okay, and that's gonna be a USB 3.2. And then we also have our USB 3 right there, okay? And these will connect to the motherboard, okay? And we'll do that one of our last steps. And then we also have our switches, okay? So that's gonna be our power switch and, yep, power LED. And then we also have our front panel audio, okay? So that's everything that we just saw. Now, what we also have inside here is it looks like they gave us a little surprise, which is really, really common in cases. So always look when you buy new cases. Sometimes they have something in here, and this is going to just be some extra cables and stuff. So let's reach in there, And let's untwist. And again, case, I think Fractal makes some amazing cases. I've built with a lot of Fractal. NZXT also makes great cases. So you kind of have to pick which ones you like. Corsair, some of their higher end ones are very, very nice. Unfortunately, I think some of their lower end ones are, well, lower end. Okay, so silica gel to keep everything dry. Interesting, I've never actually usually see this inside a brand new one, but my guess is they have this because of the wood, okay? Because that is actual wood in the front. Okay, and then our accessories. This will be important because often this will be standoffs and some specialized screws just for the case. So we'll keep this off to the side. And we're going to take out this inside here. Okay, to get this, it's just really a twist tie, but for some reason they have the twist tie underneath this drive cage. So in order to pull this out correctly, I did have to remove the entire drive cage. Okay, this is going to be for SSDs. You can see right here, this is where SSDs would go. It could also be for a 5¼ inch hard drive, okay, which is quite nice. They actually put these on the bottom. Now, that is something I'm going to look at, is they put these two, and I don't know if you can see them. So they have these two drive bays in for the bottom, okay? That's a great idea because if you're gonna put some extra hard drives and stuff in, you can mount them right there. I'm gonna take them out because our power supply, our PSU is gonna go right here. This kind of feels like it's gonna block it, okay? Especially because if I knew they were doing hard drives, I would keep it. But even for SSD mounting, I can mount SSDs right here. So I'm not going to actually keep this extra mount in because I think it's just going to be in the way. And I'll do this often for certain ones. That's just kind of a personal choice, whether you want the in or not. You can always give this to the person later. And again, if they have hard drives, that would be great because this is going to be the place to actually mount. But I'm going to take these out, set them aside because we really don't need them at this point. And I'm not installing a hard drive. So now we have a nice clear area for the power supply, okay? Speaking of which, that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to install the power supply. I always like to install the power supply first. Reason being is because it's a big, heavy object, and it's better to get that big, heavy object out of the way before we have delicate things. So this is actually a real common setup. So you can see right here that there's this frame. Okay. A lot of times you just slide the power supply in and you screw it directly into the case. But this has become kind of a new thing. And so what we're going to do is we just take, and these are thumb screws, okay, which means we're supposed to be able to do it with our thumbs, but it's a little bit harder than that. So I'm just going to loosen them, especially when it's first from the factory. Okay. And this comes out just like this. Okay, and so that's important. So we're going to pick that back up, and there's our case. And we're going to take our power supply out, and we're going to attach it to this. Okay, so here's our power supply. Got the plastic off. Let's open up and what we see. Okay, so here we've got our cable. Obviously very, very important. Depending on your country, of course, this will look different. So this is for the United States, and that's gonna be the basic 3-prong, but if you're in Europe, India, wherever you're at, you might have a different power supply. And that is something that's important, is to make sure that your voltage is maxed. Okay, this is a modular power supply, meaning that we are going to actually hook on all the cables that we need, okay? And the screws that come with it. These screws often will also come with the case, but I usually like to use the screws that come with the power supply if it's a nicer power supply, because sometimes the steel can be a little higher quality. And the actual power supply. Okay, so open up this. Put the tape right there. And there we go. Okay, that is the power supply, and it does have do not use other brands or series modular cables. So that's interesting. So a lot of times what you end up having is a lot of different modular cables that people use that are from another one. So I've actually never really seen a sticker Maybe I have, but that's kind of new. So this is saying, hey, make sure you only use the modular cables that came with this, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and remove that tag because we are only going to use the modular cables that came with it. And unfortunately, that left a little bit of glue. And all I'm doing right now is just getting off a little bit of that glue because does it matter? No, but I want it nice and clean, so that I was just putting the sticky pad down again and trying to remove it. Okay, so we're about ready to mount this. Here's the fan. What we need to make sure is that when we look at the case, do we have a bottom vent, okay? Because ideally the best way, air is gonna come in through here. Okay, so air is going to go in this way and it's going to exit this way. So it's going to go in and then out. So if I have it on the bottom mount like this, it's going to pull air from underneath the case and exhaust out here. If I have it like this, it's going to pull hot air from inside the case. If you can, it is always better to pull nice cool air for the longevity of your PSU, to pull cool air from the bottom and exit out the front, because you already have a lot of hot air inside of your case, okay? So what we need to do before we decide that is we've got to look at the case and make sure that we have a bottom vent. And we do, okay? I can see the bottom vent right there. In fact, it's even got, which is pretty common, a little dust cover. Okay, so we have a bottom vent. We also need to make sure that our feet are going to be wide enough, which they are. Okay, now if this is on real high shag carpeting, could be a problem. But as long as it's on regular carpeting, there should be enough airflow room right here to pull nice cold air. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to install the power supply. So we're going to take the power supply, and again, we're going to go down, okay? And then we've got our screws right here. Now, depending on your case, sometimes it's nice to go ahead and put on the modular pieces that you know you need early, because that's if you have enough room to be able to reach in there and plug it in. I think this one is clearing enough room from the sides that I'm going to go ahead and put the modular cables in later, because one, I know what we need. Well, we need our 24 pin to the motherboard for sure. Okay, so I could actually put that in early. What I don't know is for the video card, what we need for that. And of course we need our 8-pin for the CPU. So we're gonna go ahead and hold off on this right now and just mount the power supply, and we're gonna come back to that, okay? So I'm gonna mount it again, fan down. So I'll bring this over here. And I'm gonna put the back, so let's line this up here so you can see better. Okay, so the back here, fan down, okay? And we're going to put it in here. Okay, now that's interesting too. So I tried from the side. Often that's the way you do it, is that you input it from the side, okay? And then you go forward. This particular case, we slide in from the back. Okay, what we should find, and I do see that, is inside here, there should be some rubber feet that this sits on, and I do feel those rubber feet. So we're gonna slide, and it's gonna sit right on top of those rubber feet, okay? And that would go in like this, okay? But before we do that, remember this piece, this is special to sit on here, okay? One thing we've got to be really careful of, and I'm going to scoot this back a little bit because I want you to see something, and I've seen a lot of people make this mistake, okay? So this isn't too bad, but a lot of these are sometimes honeycomb patterns, so it's hard to figure out where the screw holes are, okay? So and I think that's part of the reason they started doing this. So I can see the hole here, 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 and here, okay, on the corner. Okay, so I can see all of those. That's important to make sure that you put it in the screw hole. So if there's a honeycomb design, make sure you don't put the screw in the wrong way. So if I set this down, this will almost act as a little template, okay? And so we're gonna go ahead and take our screws out. I would always suggest with screws, especially with something like a computer, is hand start these, okay? By hand starting it, you can make sure that it's in right, because it's very, very easy to strip So, and again, the diagonal pattern on a lot of things is really good. This one's not particularly important because tightening down, it's important for CPUs, things like this, to go diagonal, just like when you change a car tire, okay, because otherwise they can get a little bit off-centered, okay? So I'm gonna hand tighten each one of these. Once I know they're in a couple turns, I can use my ratchet, but I wanna make sure that I can start it by hand first. Okay, and again, not everybody does this. Some people just grab the screwdriver and start going for it, but we're gonna hand start. Okay, it's something I've learned over the years. It's a good idea. Okay, and we're gonna take our ratchet, and again, we don't have to go crazy with this, but I'm gonna go down, and notice I'm not even really hand doing much. Right now, I'm just kind of moving it a little bit. Okay, that thread's not great. Okay, and I'm just kind of, again, moving them down. Okay, now let's go back and actually start tightening some of these. Okay, so we're just gonna grab this until we start tightening. Okay, there we go. And okay, I'm not tightening it all the way down right now. I'm just cinching to kind of a hand tight. Okay, now I'll go back through and just give it a little bit more of an extra because this is quite a bit of weight on these. So I'm just tightening them. I'm not going crazy. They're tight. It's all the way down. I'm just tightening them maybe a quarter turn, okay? Just to make them snug. Again, we don't want to tighten too much because if you tighten too much, you can strip these threads in this. Now we have this. Looks great, okay? So let's bring this back into the picture. It's got the feet, and now I can actually put these on. It's got these thumb screws that I took off, so we're gonna go ahead and make sure they're in there. Let's do this side. Okay. And before I'm done, one thing I'll wanna do is I'll go back through and I'll probably just give these with this a little bit more of a tight. In fact, we could probably do it now. Reason is these are supposed to be thumb tight, but what you don't want, see that one had quite a bit more room. What you don't want is any of these to get loose over time or someone to kind of be a looky look and look. Okay, we have power supply installed. So now we're gonna look at what we need next. Okay, so this case is a little unusual. So we've got this front area here, okay? So this case is a little unusual because we've got this kind of panel right here. And what this is to actually mount fans on the side, which I think is actually a great idea. But we can mount fans and we can do a side exhaust. We're gonna go ahead and take this out because we're not gonna mount those fans. We should have enough airflow to go all the way through. In fact, we have 3 fans in the front right now. What I'm gonna do is move one of these bottom fans and go ahead and install it on the side. So let's take this out. Okay, and once I loosen like this, just comes off. Again, great piece, okay? This is kind of unique to be able to put these fans and roll from the sides, but I'd rather have a little bit more of this clear. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look at removing one of these fans, and I'm going to mount one of these bottom fans to the back because that'll help the airflow to go all the way through. And I think we should have plenty of space to do that. So let's do that. when we're looking at fans, one of the things we want to see sometimes is which way is the air blowing, okay? So if we look at this, often on the sides there's arrows, okay? And unfortunately, this does not have arrows, which is too bad because that's often an easy way to tell. So it'll be an arrow to say which way the wind direction goes, okay? But what I can do is I can see the front, and this is facing this way, okay? Which means that this is going to draw air from the front and it's going to exit out the back, okay? So we're gonna actually keep with that same style. Okay, so at the case, I've installed the fan back here, okay? And I tightened it somewhat, but I can still loosen it and move this around because I'm not sure if this is the exact place I want the fan, but I'd rather put it in now so then when we put the motherboard in, I can kind of judge to see what it looks like. And then this, we're gonna run up through the top, through here, and then that should give us plenty of space to be able to run it back to the fan header or directly to the fan. So this has a 3, but this also has a header. Ideally, I like to plug these directly into the fan headers and the motherboard if at all possible, because one problem is you can't tell if if one of the fan dies and it's all in a fan splitter, then you won't be able to tell. Okay, so we're gonna actually see if we can attach all of those directly to the motherboard itself. Okay, so it looks like we're about ready here. The only thing we need to really look at is what do we have installed already as far as standoffs, okay? And these standoffs are super important. So it looks like we've got ATX already installed, so we should be good. But that's really important because if you look down here, okay, that right there, that's a standoff, okay? And we should have standoffs. Whether you're working with a micro ATX board, that's gonna have different standoffs than a full-size ATX board. That's gonna have different standoffs than an extended. So here it's got little initials, EAM, extended ATX and micro, okay, which is quite nice. If I move over a little bit, you can see this one's just for an extended. Okay, that's for E. We do not have an extended motherboard, so all we should be able to do is leave what's in here. But again, we'll definitely test this, okay, before we go. And this board even has something for an ITX, so I don't know if you can see that. But what's interesting is it's actually got a little bit of a legend, which is, again, your higher end boards don't expect all cases to have this, but some of your higher end cases might have a little legend like this. So it's kind of nice. And it's exactly what I said. E's for extended, A for ATX, M for micro, and then I for ITX. Okay, so the case, we're definitely not done with the case, but at this point, we are done with the case enough to start doing some other, which would be the motherboard, okay? So let's start prepping it. Okay, so now is the time to look at the motherboard, okay? And I've got just a razor blade in case we need to open anything, so it looks good. So before I do this, I'm gonna go ahead and get my anti-static wrist strap on, okay? The best thing to do is if you have a watch or jewelry, you should probably take that off. So I'm gonna take off my ring and my watch, okay? A nice way to do this is put this on your non-dominant hand, because if you put it on your dominant hand, you're always gonna be crossing yourself. So since I'm right-handed, I'll put this on my left hand. The other thing is if you have kind of hairy arms, then ideally I put this underneath. Okay, it's just got better contact, okay? So I just tighten that down, and I'm gonna strap this to the metal video frame here. Okay, So I've got my anti-static wrist strap. Let's open this up and see what we got. Okay, and we have this little side piece, and this is the Wi-Fi antenna. Really, really common, okay? So we'll keep that back in here for now. And this is the anti-static bag. A couple things about anti-static bag that's important. One, it's anti-static inside the bag, not outside. Okay, so some people do what's called a build on top of box, which means they use the cardboard and they build on top, which is absolutely fine, but don't place the bag on top. We're also gonna look under here because a couple things that's important. We have a SATA cables, okay, which we don't need because we're using M.2. This looks like it's an extender for RGB. Okay, we're gonna keep this out. No, that's for, yeah, this might be. A lot of times, if you're using M.2, the standoff's going to come with the motherboard. In fact, it always does. A lot of people buy an M.2 from Amazon or wherever, and they go, oh, it's missing the standoff because it comes with your motherboard. Okay, so this might be the standoff, but it might have one already built in. And quick install guide, oh, we've got more. Okay, that looks like more. Yes, these are definitely going to be our M.2 standoffs because we have 3 of them. We're not going to install 3, but we can. And our instruction guide. And this is one of those things you want to keep. Unfortunately, this is one that it's a new trend and I'm very against it, but this is scan the QR code for the whole thing. The reason I don't like this is because I'd rather paper, because I don't want electronics around when I'm building. Okay, so unfortunately this has some very simple directions for some of this, but it does not have the full directions, which is nice to have, especially, let's look, yes, the front panel connectors it doesn't have. Yes, it does. There we go, okay? That is an important diagram. So at least it has that, because that's really what we need, because this is a very small, tight space. And when I install those front panels, I need to be able to see it, okay? So luckily it's got that, so I'll give MSI that, but I really wish they included the full paper. I realize it's, better for the environment not to, but it's nice to have. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead, and this should have tape right here. So we're going to very gently cut the tape. Okay. And when you handle a motherboard, ideally you want to handle the sides and not touch as much as the bottom and everything else as possible. Okay. And this is very tightly in there. That's a big board. Okay, I'm going to try not to break the anti-static bag because if I ever need to return it or anything else, I need that intact. Okay, so there we go. That is our motherboard. We have some very nice metal here. That's very, very nice. Under here is going to be our chipset. Okay, we'll have more chipset under here. This is our rear I/O panel. A lot of times this piece is removable, meaning that you have to pop it into the side of the case, okay? Which is important. Make sure that you always take the rear I/O shield and that you put it into the case before you mount the motherboard. This luckily, and this is, I'm starting to see this a little bit more, this has it already attached to this. So that's kind of nice, so we don't have to do that first, okay? And if we look at the back, we've got a couple cool things. We've got a BIOS flashback, a clear CMOS button. That's super interesting. So if you have CMOS issues, if you did your BIOS incorrectly, we can press a button. Here's our HDMI out. We're not going to use this because we're going to use an onboard graphics. Here's USB-C. This is a 40 gigabit connection, meaning that's Thunderbolt. USB, that's a 5G connection. This is also, we're going to flash our BIOS. It's only going to be able to be in this one. We have 2 USB 10G, so that means we're running 3.1 here at least, not 3.0, which is 5G. We've got USB 2, lots of ports there. We've got a USB-C 20 gigs, so that's a more normal, that's a 3.2, which is nice. And that's odd. These are a little bit tilted, but that must be the design. Huh. Hope that's not manufacturing. That's unusual. USB 5G, so it's a USB 3.0. Then we have our NIC. We've got our Wi-Fi 7 built in, and then of course mic, line out and line in. Okay, now before jumping, yes, we can install the RAM, which is important. We need to do that. We need to install the CPU, which is important, and we need to do that. But first, because it's kind of here, let's install the M.2, okay, because it's here, and that we're going to remove that and be able to install that fairly easy. So we're going to take our M.2. So we're going to take this guy. We're going to just set it off for a sec. We're going to take this again. We want to make sure that we don't destroy boxes. So we're just going to vary with a razor that apparently needs to be sharpened slightly. Take this. And there we go. Okay. So let's keep that here. And this is our M.2, so this should be a way to easily take this off. Wow, that's a new one. Okay, so this just has a push button, and that comes off like this. This is usually bolted down, so that's really unusual. This is just a slide mechanism. I've never seen anything like that, and it just snaps in. Nice. I mean, that makes it very convenient. Normally, there's 2 screws right here, and then you just undo the screws if they have a shield. Not all of them have shields, okay? We've got a couple different places we can install M.2. In fact, I can show you right here. This is for M.2, and this is for M.2. And that's what these stands are for. Okay, so I would put these stands here and here. Okay, and those stands would go ahead and put it there. If you run M.2, you have to decide if you're going to get it with a heat shield or heat spreader already installed or not. I like to get them without. Okay, so this does not have a heat shield because often there's a built-in one for a primary one. Okay, don't have it if it's got heat shielding, if it's got a heat spreader on it, don't also put this on top. Okay, it won't fit. If it has no heat spreader, then it needs to go under a shielded one. That's going to help. If it has a heat spreader, then put it where the naked or exposed ones. Okay? So we're going to go back. We're going to lift this and take it off. This does have a sticky pad and plastic, so we'll want to make sure we remove that plastic before we put it back on. And so we're going to install this. This looks like it's... We're going to open our iFixit kit. They are not sponsoring, although iFixit, I'd love for you to sponsor. So we're going to go ahead and grab this, and this is a pretty thin Phillips. So we're going to do this. And we might not even need this at all, but basically, yeah, I don't think we even need this because it's going to turn. Okay, so this is pretty turnkey. So an M.2 installation, you've got a notch. Your notch is going to help line up. Okay, and so you can see where the notch goes. So we're going to, let's zoom in a little bit so you can see installation here. Okay, so the idea is going at about a 30-degree angle or so. Okay, so if you put this in right, it should just stand up. Okay, so basically that's how you know you're right. Okay, so you're going, it's not quite a 45, but about a 30-degree tilt on this. Okay. And you just go in a little bit like Estim. Make sure that it is snug all the way in, okay? You don't really want to rock too much, but you can rock a little bit just to make sure we don't see any copper or anything exposed here, okay? We're going to slide this out of the way. And then that's going to go down. And I've seen this is actually a fairly common one. That just slides and that holds it. I actually like screws on this side just because it makes me feel more confident that this won't ever, through shaking or anything, move out, but that ideally is pretty firm. So remember, we got to put this back. Before we do, you need to take this and we just take that off, okay? And then this, we take off that plastic, and then once we remove that plastic, then this is exposed. Ideally, don't touch it, okay? So we're going to put that on right like this. And then this guy clicks in. Okay. And that is M.2 installation. So it really doesn't get too much harder than that. Obviously, this one made it really easy because I didn't even have screws or anything, but that is the M.2 installed. So we are done with that. And we did not need our stands. Highly suggest that you keep these in the motherboard box in case you ever install other. In fact, if we install some more M.2s, we have to make sure that we use that. Okay, so now it looks like what we're going to have to look at is installing our CPU next. We can do RAM next, but it's probably good to get the CPU out of the way because the RAM could block us if we need anything. Okay. Also looks like, so thinking ahead, I've got two 8-pin CPU power. So a lot of times it used to be an 8 and a 4 and you didn't have to run the 4. On a higher end models, you're actually running 2 8-pins, so 2 CPUs, just because these are taking so much. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of keep a conscious note of that. So we need to install this AMD, but we've got to figure out all of this. So basically this is for your heatsink. Some heat sinks clip on. A lot of heat sinks go in here, so we have to decide whether we remove these or not. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on the actual water cooling unit, okay, and how that connects. Okay, so one of the things I looked at was basically are we going to be using these clips, which we're not. So we're going to go ahead and remove these right now, just because they'll be in our way slightly. And again, remember what I said about the ratchet. Ideally, you shouldn't be using these, but I'm just using it to loosen, okay? Because again, the factory set on these sometimes is a little tough. And then I'm gonna use an iFixit, but we're gonna go ahead and get a slightly bigger Phillips. You could probably loosen these with an iFixit, which is just fine. Problem is that I've discovered is if it's a factory seal, sometimes it can be a little strong to first break that initial seal. And while these are amazing screwdrivers, the metal will bend. So you don't want to ruin your screwdriver when you could just take something like the ratchet and quickly break the seal and then use this for the rest. Okay? There we go. Okay, now, what is important is there's a back plate here. So if I pick this up, well, this one's, a lot of times this back plate will just fall off, okay? And that's okay. You just have to make sure that you put it back. It's just to protect the back. So right now this is holding on here, but just know that that's technically loose, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and put the plate over there, and then let's look at installing the CPU. Okay, we'll put that over here. So let's take our CPU, and again, we're going to very gently cut that open. Okay. And as we cut this open, this opens this. Very nice presentation AMD is doing. Again, AMD, Intel, both excellent, excellent brands. Okay, so you can't go wrong with anything. Now, again, this box is a little deceiving because this is so big, it looks like they're using the same box to house their stock CPU. Because this is a very wide box, and that's why it's important to look. There is no stock CPU here, so it's a good thing that we bought an aftermarket, because otherwise, you wouldn't be turning on your computer. So we're going to slide that out. And again, what they're probably doing is reusing the same type of box. Okay. Now, this sticker here, you don't need it per se. I always use these stickers. To me, it's the only sticker I'll put on the case. Reason being is because this says very easy for any IT technician to look at and say, hey, what am I dealing with? An Intel, a Ryzen, AMD, what series, just to kind of get a feel for it. So I'm going to put this on very last as thing. So clam cases, be very careful opening because sometimes things fly out. And ideally, what we're going to try to do is not touch the bottom or the top, okay? So you're just going to want to touch the sides. And you can look at this. Now, this is the new AMD 5 series, which means they changed it. So this is no longer PGA. There used to be pins here. There's no pins, okay? This is totally flat, so these are called lants. Okay, and again, you do not want to touch this. So the pins are actually going to be on the motherboard, okay? So we're just going to move this out of the way. Okay, and let's move our motherboard back. And we're going to set this down. I'm actually going to go ahead and put it on the cardboard. Okay, and now we're going to move this back. And this should open this. Okay, and then we can remove this. Okay, one of the things we want to look at when we're installing, because remember, since this is an LGA and there's no pins on the CPU, there's pins here. So what you kind of want to do is just look a little bit and see if you see any visibly bent pins, okay? Again, don't touch this area, but just look for bent pins. I actually think it's much harder to tell bent pins on an LGA than it is on a PGA because it's very easy to take the CPU and look like this. This to me is much harder. Now, Again, when we grab the CPU, okay, there's an arrow right there, okay? There's also an arrow right there. That tells me how to install it, okay, which is nice. So arrow to arrow, sometimes it's a dot. So we're gonna go ahead and just zero force insertion. All you do is just set it down, okay? Do not press, do not drop. And then I do what I call the wiggle test, which I just slightly move from side to side. Okay, it's nice and in. So now we should be able to close this, okay? And then this goes back, and that's going to go, and that's going to lift down on top of this, okay? So there we go, and around the side. CPU is installed, okay? Now, normally, I would highly suggest at this point that you go ahead and put on an aftermarket cooler and stuff. Ours is gonna be a little bit more difficult because we're doing water cooling, which means it's not just a heat sink and a fan that I'm sticking on top, because that's what you should do, because right now it's exposed. Now remember, also, you need to make sure that you have thermal paste on this. Most of your, if it's a factory heat sink, it'll usually have thermal paste pre-installed in the bottom, okay? If not, you've got to put a dab of thermal paste here. For water cooling, sometimes it'll be pre-installed, but most of the time it's going to be you actually apply it yourself, okay? So let's mount the brackets for the water cooler. Okay, so being this is an AM5, the directions for this particular one says those little ridges. Okay, and so basically ridges downs for AM4, ridges up for AM5. So we're just going to place those right on top. Ridges up, because ridges up should mean for AM5. And that's what this is. Okay. Okay, so we've got this basically set up, getting ready for water cooling. We're not done yet, and we still need to apply water cooling and everything else. So we still have quite a bit more to do, but we've got the standoffs and everything in. So for right now, that's gonna be it, because we can't actually put the water cooling on. Again, very different. If I had a heat sink, I would just install it and I'm ready to go. But because the water cooling has to connect to fans up on top and everything else, we can't do any more because I can't attach it now out of the box. So we're gonna stop that for now, okay? So now we're gonna go ahead and look at installing RAM, okay? So that's right here. Now, one thing that's important on RAM when you install is you need to figure out your channels, okay? Luckily, right here, it's telling us, okay? So we're only gonna install 2 sticks of RAM. Okay, and it tells us that we need to do B2 here and A2. Okay, so it's going to be these two. Putting them in the wrong channel, so this will work together. Okay, so these 2 channels will work together, which is important. And that's what you want. If I put them, say, in the 2 right next to each other, usually they're color coordinated. So this is interesting that they're not. Okay, so this is all black. So this little guide is really important. This should also be in your motherboard guide. Okay, so we want to make sure we install it here, because if I install it here and here, it's not going to work correctly. Okay, so you need to install it there. So let's do that. Okay, so when we install, notice there's a notch. Okay, this is DDR5. The notch is going to move. Okay, so what I'm going to first do is I'm going to hold it up like this. The reason I'm doing that is because this will kind of tell me, and if you look at it, is the notch go this way? This way. I will say DDR5 is much, much harder than DDR4. Okay, DDR4, the notch was much more off-center. In DDR5, the notch is very close. So that looks right, but let's again look like this. Line it up, definitely off. Okay, and hopefully you can see that, very close. Again, DDR5 is much harder than DDR4 was, because they've moved the notch to just about center. So we're going to put this in, and again, all I'm doing here is I'm just first kind of putting it down, okay? Meaning I'm not applying any pressure. I'm just setting it right, okay? So where it should be. So on this, what you want to do is take both, I use my thumbs right here, and we're going to press straight down. Now, if you heard that click, that's perfect. Okay. Ideally, we shouldn't hear click, click. We want to make sure that we don't angle it back and forth and rock it back and forth. We want to go straight down with it. okay? So that's straight down, looks great. So now let's do our second stick of RAM. And again, it might be like, oh, G.SKILL and G.SKILL. Be careful, these are just little heat spreaders that's on it. They could be installed wrong. So let's just take a look again. Let's hold it up, that looks good. Let's hold it the other direction. That does not look good. So let's go back like this, that is correct. I'm just making sure it's in, okay? And I have not pressed down yet. I'm just making sure it's in the actual rails and boom. Okay, and I know I'm installed right because that went in really nice. It's in there, these are up. Okay, so it's exactly what we want. So that is RAM installed. It's a little awkward because sometimes you have to put quite a bit of pressure. And that's something that you just have to get used to, is how much pressure is too much. RAM is a good amount of pressure and you have to just kind of feel it. I highly suggest taking some old computers and take out the RAM, put the RAM in. Like, try experimenting with that for a little bit because that'll help you immensely to get the feel for RAM, okay? So at this point, we've got the M.2 installed, we've got the CPU installed, we've got our RAM installed, okay? We really can't do much else. Again, if I had my CPU fan and it was air cooled and not water cooled, I would have that already installed right now. In fact, I kind of wish I had that because water cooling is kind of a pain. But this is, everything that we're going to install for now outside the box. So now what we need to do is put it in. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do to put it in, I'm going to go back to my actual box that came with the motherboard, okay, because I need screws to be able to get in here. So let's look at what kind of screws it gives. So it gives us a whole pack here. So let's kind of open this and see what we've got. We've got a couple twist ties, that's great. We've got some screws here, but I can tell you right now that that's not going to be for the motherboard. One, because there's not enough of them. Two, because they're too big, okay? So let's look at this. These are extra standoffs, so we can see that, okay? So we don't need extra standoffs. We should be good on that. These look like they might be it, but let's keep going. Okay, again, this doesn't have thread all the way down, so that's not going to be them. Hey, it's the rubber pieces that we put on for the fan to mount in the back. And then we have these. So really now we're between two sets of screws that could be it, okay? Often they will give you a guide in the motherboard manual to kind of see. And in fact, right here, this does kind of give us a guide. So we've got power supply screws, motherboard standoffs, mounting screws, drive screw, HD dampening mounting screws. So it looks like we've got two different mounting screws. Okay, so 16 and 11. So we need to figure out which screws, because some are going to be for your hard drives and things like this, some aren't. So we've got two different ones to choose from. They're different threads, so we need to see which one's actually going to be it. So let's open this one. And again, this is a really good idea. Before you get the motherboard in your hand and everything, let's find out which ones are it. So we're going to take these. I'm going to try screwing them in, okay? And what I'm looking for is, one, that they screw in real easy and that they don't move back and forth, okay? So this looks really nice. And if I move back and forth, there's no movement, okay? So to show it, I'm going to try one of these other ones, okay? And we're going to see what happens with it. So let's undo that. Okay, nice solid fit, screws in, no looseness when I pull up and down. So we're going to try these other ones. It's got a much thinner thread. Can you hear that? That's me pulling up and down. Okay, that's not good. And a lot of people would put that on and be, oh, this just fits fine. But literally, I can pull it out. You could almost get away with it. But again, this is a much, much thinner thread. So if I show both of these, you can see that's the correct one, that's not. Okay, so I'm going to use these and not that. Okay, this one screws in, but it doesn't quite hold it. This is the correct one. And again, usually your case manual will have that, but you might, if you bought a cheap case or something else, it might not be in there, okay? So we're going to put those away. And we need, if we look at all of this, we need 1, 2, 3 here, 4, 5. We do not need this one because this does not actually have a screw. This is a placeholder. It's kind of nice because it helps put the motherboard in place. And then we've got 3 in the bottom. So we need a total of 8. Okay, so I'm just going to count these and get these ready on the side. 2, 4, 6, and 8. And the reason is once I get the motherboard going, I really don't want to keep touching it and picking it back up and everything else. Okay, so we're going to install the motherboard now. So let's make sure this is out of the way. Okay, and we're going to drop it in like this, and that's how we're going to put it in at an angle. Okay, now normally for the motherboard, I would always suggest that when you're picking it up and holding it, that if you've got that heatsink installed, that you go ahead and grab it by the heatsink, okay? So it's actually very normal to just pick it up by that heatsink. Because we don't have the heatsink installed, I can't do that. So it makes it a little bit more awkward. So I'm touching on the sides. I'm trying not to touch any of the components. We don't want our finger oils on this. So I'm just gonna kind of set this in. I'll pick it up by this piece because that's pretty massive. And it sets in, okay? And it sets in just like that, okay? So I swooped it in, and I set it in. Yeah, again, I've got this exposed. So I want to be careful I don't touch this. Once it's in there, this little piece right here helps to hold it in. So now what I've got to do is put those screws in. So I'm going to grab my iFixit. And what I usually do is I go across. Okay, so I'm going to go top right. And now I'm going to go bottom left. And this is just because if you go in a line all the way across, sometimes what happens is you'll end up with it being cockeyed again. And then we just install the rest. Bottom left, top right. So now let's go top left. Okay, now one thing that's super important is to remember the standoffs that were underneath and to know how many screws you put in. So I can see I've got 1 screw here, 2, 3, 4, 5, that was the one already there, 6, 7, 8, 9 on the bottom. The reason that's so important is because you do not want to stand off an extra one. You want to make sure that a screw goes to every standoff, but an extra standoff could be sitting on the back. So say you have one that you didn't account for. So right here, I have 9 holes, all are accounted for, all standoffs are accounted for. But say I had one that was in a strange position. If the motherboard's sitting on top and resting on it, it could cause a short circuit. Okay, so it's actually extremely common. So you want to make sure that your standoffs match, and it does. Okay, now that we've got this, we've got a couple things left. Obviously, we have video card, but we're going to do the video card as one of the last steps because the video card's big and it's going to take a lot of room. Okay, so at this point, we need to still do our up here. We need to be able to do our water cooling, and we still have all the power and the data connections. Okay, so we still have quite a bit to do on this, but we're getting close. Okay, so we can do power, but we could also wait a little bit on power. Might want to mount our top fans right now for water cooling. This is the radiator, okay? And then the radiator has fans, okay? So the way we're doing this is the fans will take the air coming from here and go out the top, which you just need to make sure that your top does have vents to do this. Otherwise, you're gonna have a problem. A lot of people mount in the front, but actually I like this because this will pull air from the front of the case in, and it'll exit out up here, and it'll also exit out the back. Okay, so we should get real nice airflow, kind of just blowing everything through. Okay, so again, that's here, and I've got the cables towards the back. That way we can route them nice and easy. Okay, so then we just have to connect this to the actual board. Okay, so we're gonna go side to side, putting these on. Okay, and then we're going to reach in and we're just going to tighten just a little bit to make sure it's nice and snug. So I'm going to go here and tighten, and then I'm going to go across, always cross, and then let's go here, and let's go here. Okay, so that seems nice and tight. So again, snug, it just stops. That's how you know when you're tightened. That's how most heat sinks are. And this should just stop, and that should just stop. Okay, so we basically have our water cooling installed. Okay, we're not done. There's still some important pieces that we have to do, like all of the power pieces, but we are done as far as the actual installation. Okay, this is gonna kind of glow on. This has this kind of funny little connection here. And what this is to be able to install all the different things together. So it's got software and things like this. Just for ease, we're going to go ahead and install this now. That way we don't forget about it, because that would be horrible. So it looks like it just plugs in like this. And I can hear it snap. And then this is going to get a little messy here because we're going to have quite a few things kind of in our way, but that's okay. So basically, we can look at this, and this here, that's going to go to a USB 2 port. Okay, so we're going to have to route this somewhere for USB 2. And this is going to go to a SATA. So that's a big deal, because being that's going to go to a SATA port, that means we need to make sure in the modular power supply that we include a SATA, which is kind of too bad because it's a lot of extra stuff, but that's the price to pay. And then what this is, okay, so that's going to go to USB. This is going to be to plug into the system. So what these are going to be is, so these back fans will plug in here and they'll act as one. Okay, and then this will have to go to SATA to actually power it. And then this has to connect to the CPU. And this will connect to the pump, okay? So you can see right back here, that's gonna go, and there's a couple places we can put it in, okay? So you can see here that CPU fan, sys1, sys fan 2, so pump sys1. You can do either because it's going to be able to control it. So we can do the 4-pin CPU or the AMD pump. Anyway around it, this is a 3-pin. Which is a little bit too bad that it's not a 3, but this is kind of just a dumb pin. If you plug something in that's meant for a 4-pin, and there's only 3, there's a ridge, and that's how you know you're plugging it in correctly, okay? And so we've got both of these, and again, we're gonna get a little bit of cable messy, but we'll clean everything up after we're done. Twist ties, be very careful. When you undo them, you do not want twist ties inside of your computer, because they can short it out, because the ends of these are metal. So you never want twist ties facing in towards your motherboard. I see some people do it in the back, and that's probably fine, but don't have them in, okay? So we're gonna kind of unsprawl these out a little bit. Okay. Be a little gentle with this. There we go. Okay, and then we've got to take this, and that is going to be our 2 connectors. Okay, so that's going to go in. So we are going to have an extension, so that goes in like this. And again, you can see that we can kind of plug these in anyway, but we're going to plug those in to the board. So there we go, and that's one. Actually, I'll tell you what I like. They'll all output power, but the way that's designed, let's put you in here, and let's take our other one, and that's going to go in like this, okay? And then again, this has to go to SATA, and then this is going to go to a free space. Okay, so again, very messy. Don't like all this, but we'll clean this up later. So let's route this towards the back, because we're not going to use any of this for now, but we will as we get closer, need to start cleaning this up. And again, that cable and stuff's gonna go away. This needs to go to a USB, but the USB is all the way at the bottom. So we'll just make sure that we pipe that down to the back. So for now, we're gonna pick that up and we're gonna drop these through the back, okay? And that will kind of clean up all of that. So we're gonna drop this guy, you'll see it pop out the back, okay? And that's what the back's for. The back's to keep all this nice and clean so we don't have such a mess going through. So let's pop all this through. And cable organization's not just for aesthetics, but it's also because it'll actually help airflow and everything else. So we want to keep it as nice and neat as possible. And that's what that back's for, is to help with that. Okay. And that's already a lot of the cables going out through the back. Yeah, and again, some of this we can clean up, but what you'll see is already starting to take shape. Okay, so we got a lot of cables tucked back here. This one I might reroute, so that way it actually goes in through the back, and then that way it's nice and straight. But already we're seeing a lot better, looking good. We still have the sticker, connect SATA before turning on. We'll peel this once we're close to it, okay? Now, we've got our water cooling installed. We've got CPU underneath installed, we got RAM installed, we got M.2. So now we need to start hooking up some power to everything. And then we've also got to start doing data connections. And we're getting close in the video card, but we're almost there. Okay, so we've got all of our water cooling basically hooked up. So again, what you can see here is up at the top. So you've got two spots. You've got a CPU fan and you have a pump. So really this is kind of dependent upon your water cooling situation. Usually you always want something in the CPU fan. Otherwise you're gonna have to turn off a lot of warnings about that there's no CPU fan. This is actually the pump. So this would make more sense to be in the CPU pump area, but I don't want the warnings. And the way this is designed is there's not, these fans here don't actually connect directly to the board, which is not my favorite. I actually would like them to connect to the board, but it's just the way, and I could still connect them to the board manually. In fact, I could connect them to here and here. But the way that this is designed, and I'll show you on the back, is it's actually got a separate, actually, let's start looking at the back connections. So it's very, very messy right now. This is something we'll clean at the end, but let's go through a little bit of what we're seeing. So this is the way the water cooling pump is coming. So both of the fans are going into the splitter, okay? So that's your splitter, and then this is going to plug into a SATA port, okay, SATA power. So that's gonna go in like this, and then we have this, the USB, and this is a USB 2. So that's gonna go to a USB 2 header on the motherboard. So the concept is that it'll be able to monitor itself through the program, although it's not necessarily gonna be able to monitor the fans outside of electricity. So I could manually hook these two fans up, and we'll see how it works and how it performs. I might, because I really, again, don't like this concept that the motherboard won't know if the fans are spinning or not, because it's just going to be going off SATA. And to me, that's always a problem. But this whole case, that's one of the issues that I see already, because if we look up here, we can see this is a fan header. And again, this isn't my favorite, but we have three fans here. So we have two in the back, or two in the front, excuse me, and then we have one in the back, because remember, there was three in the front, and then I moved one to the back just to increase the airflow. So the fans are in here, and then all of those will plug in to one header. Okay, so you can see that this is the one header right here that it'll plug into. Okay, so we still have all the front panel connectors that we still need to connect, and power. So if you remember, we had all of those modular power connector. So let's go through all the things that we have to connect. So SATA, which is too bad because frankly, I only need one SATA connector for that, for the water cooling. So it's too bad that we have, this is kind of a whole lot of cable for one connector, but that's what we have. And let's see what else we have in here. Our 24-pin ATX power supply, that's a power the motherboard. So that's going to be crucial. We need to get that plugged in. And we're going to come back to this one because that's a unique one for this board. Actually, no, that's the unique one for the board. Let's come back to that one. This here is CPU. Okay, so this is our 8-pin CPU connector. And what we should find is we actually have another one. Okay, and again, don't confuse these with your 6 and 8-pin PCIe. So these are going to go into the top of the motherboard. These almost always the top left. Okay, so these are going to be the two. And a lot of times you can run on just one. And in fact, for years, even when they used to have an 8 and a 4, I would still just use the 8. And previous to that, it was only just a 4. Now, just because of some of the total power watts that some of these CPUs are using, it's not a bad idea to plug in both. It's not going to hurt anything. So I'll go ahead and plug both CPUs in. In fact, we can just leave these out because that is something that we'll do very, very shortly. In fact, that might be one of the first things that we plug in. Okay, and let's see. Again, I'm just kind of just organizing cables as I go through. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and push this up here. And again, I'm just getting this mess of wires, and all these wires will get cleaned up here towards the end. Right now, I'm just kind of, so we're going to put that towards the top right. Okay, this, our 24-pin, we still have to plug in. And what else do we have here? Aha, okay. So this is a big deal. This is that 600 watt. This is the new power connector that you're seeing on some of the 4000, 5000 series NVIDIA. And, you know, we'll see this more and more. So usually it's a 6 and 8-pin PCIe. In fact, usually it looks exactly like that, okay? So you can see that this is a 6-pin. That's how you can tell the difference from a CPU because the 2-pin comes off, okay? So a CPU will be a 4 to 4, okay? So if you have a 6 and a 2, that's specifically for your graphics cards usually. So that's going to be a PCIe. Okay, so that's a PCIe one, and that's normally what would attach. Now, in some of the higher-end graphics card, you'd often have 2 of these, but they've changed it completely to this, okay? This is the new 12VH, okay, PWR. So this is the new one that's replacing that 6 and 8-pin, okay? And if we look at it, we actually still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 2, so we have 12 pins. That's why they call it a 12, okay? Well, also because of a voltage. This can handle 600 watts, okay? 600 watts. So this is a beast. This is the one that they've had problems with it melting. And that's basically because this, you do not want to quick tight bend this at the connector, okay? Your ATX 3.1 power supplies have helped with that, but these were melting because there's so much power going through. So this one cable is going to power. Now, where this is plugged in, this is interestingly plugged into 2 8-pin PCIe. Okay, so that's super interesting. So we do have to do that, but that's going to be one of the last things we do because that's going to be for the cable for the video card. So this one now, you might be, so why do I have this plugged in if I have the video card already plugged in? And I'll show you where this is going to go, but this is an interesting addition. And MSI is starting to do this, and we'll see if some other manufacturers start doing this. So this will actually plug into the bottom of the motherboard, and it's to exclusively supply power to the motherboard, additional power. Because you might be like, well, no, my 24-pin, that's a supply power to the motherboard. You're right. And then the 2 8-pins are supply power to the CPU. This is for all the PCI Express links. So there's a little bit of a controversy, and frankly, MSI is a little vague as to its purpose. There is thoughts that it's just higher end. Maybe if you're going to run 2 video cards and put them in a SLI connection, although most video cards don't have SLI anymore. That's where you can connect the 2 together, or Crossfire, which is what AMD called it. So it could be for some of the PCI Express. It could also be because people are putting in so many of the new gens M.2s that is helping supply extra power to that because your M.2 NVMe would run on PCI Express. The other theory is that it also might be helping to supply for the USB-C in your front panels, that it can help supply power for charging that because USB-C now can supply quite a bit of watts of power. So again, even MSI's website's a little vague outside it. It helps supply additional power to the motherboard and PCIe lanes if they need it. So we're going to go ahead and attach it because it should not cause any harm. It should only be used if it's needed. And just in case, and in the build that we're doing now, you would be completely fine not attaching this. The build that we have now should not draw any more power than that, than the standard cables will supply. But I'm going to go ahead and put it in just in case for future expansion, just in case, the client wants to add a whole bunch more M.2s or something else. Again, it shouldn't hurt it, but it also won't hurt it to leave it alone, okay? So now we need to start plugging in some of our power cables because we are ready to do that. So the first thing let's do is let's plug in. Again, this is my top left. So let's go ahead and plug in our two 8-pins, okay? And notice they have a clip, okay? And these are all keyed, and that's important, okay? So when I say keyed, if you look at these, they're all different shapes, okay? So let's see if you can see it right there, okay? So they're all different shapes. You see some they're just squares, some have a rounded. And the reason they're keyed is so you can't plug them in the wrong direction because that would be really, really bad because it would literally send different voltages throughout the motherboard. So we're going to just pop those in the hole up here. Always look, make sure that you have a nice case should have a hole here on the top left to be able to feed this through. If it doesn't, then you're probably going to want to run it underneath the motherboard. But again, know that first before you've installed the motherboard, okay? So let's flip this over and let's plug that in. So we're going to kind of just tuck all these other cables away for now. And we're going to flip this over. Okay. And you can probably see where they go, right? This side of the way. Right there, okay? And I've got them coming out right here and here. I see that there's a fan cable right here, so I'm just going to kind of tuck that around. And again, we'll do cable management as one of the last things. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel, because this is a little tight now, and I feel a ridge at the top, okay? And that's good to know because that's where this clip's going to go, okay? So I'm going to merely do a real kind of big bend. Again, you don't want anything too tight. And when you plug it in, you can feel it click. Let's do a nice big bend. Again, nothing too tight. There we go. And it clicked right in. The angle, again, normally this is a little bit easier, but we've got fans, so we've got this whole water cooling setup up here. So it's a little tight right there. And we could have probably installed these before, but luckily this case has quite a bit of room, so we're good. Now, the next thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and hook up the 24-pin power because we might as well get that done. And the 24-pin power, the motherboard power is going to go right here, okay? So we're going to feed this into the top slot right here. So I'm going to lift this on its side. And I'm going to grab my 24-pin. And I'm just going to feed it. Okay, so you can see here a little bit that I'm feeding it to the back. And I'm going to feed it up through the top. Okay. And that's nice and in there. And let's put this back down. And you can see that it's fed right here. Again, you don't want to go too tight on this, okay? This, again, is keyed, and it also has a ridge. I feel the ridge right here. So I'm going to kind of just give a nice big bend. Don't go too tight with this because, again, you could risk some of these pins popping out. And all of these pins are carrying voltages. And that's it. Okay. Now, some people get really fancy and they have matching color and everything else, but honestly, for this build, especially kind of being dark and we're not doing glass, looks very nice. Okay. And again, as we start looking at the board, we're starting to see things come together. We've got a couple of these cables can't really go anywhere. Okay, that's part of the problem of water cooling, but they're not that bad. This cable here will tuck in a little bit, so already it's looking pretty clean. Okay, so we've got CPU power done. We've got 24 pin done. Additional power, let me show you down here. This is the brand new one that, again, is not normal. That right there. Okay. That is not normal. That is not normally what goes here. Okay. But we're going to plug a PCI Express in here. So basically now what I've got to see is where that can go. So I think the best part is there's a hole right here. So we'll come out right here just to keep it neat. And that's all we're doing is just, to help keep things neat. Okay. So we're going to reach in the back. I'm going to find that PCIe, that extra PCIe that I plugged in. Okay, and I found it. And then we're going to just route that right up here. And you'll notice, some of this is for the camera, so I'm having to move this around quite a bit. But you're also going to be kind of lifting this up quite a bit and moving things. And that's just the nature of building. Okay, this is normally for a PCIe. This is normally for your video card, so it's a 6 and an 8. This is an 8-pin, but it is meant for PCIe, so it is this power. But basically, this little 2-pin, you just kind of have to hold it, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel, and it looks like the clip is on the bottom, okay? And so that's important to know as I feed this in, because basically, I'm going to feed this in, and click, just like that, okay? Easy click, not a big deal. So at this point, most of our power is done. We've got the SATA for the back, but otherwise we have our CPU power. We've got our 24-pin power. We've got our unusual new power. So at this point, let's start hooking in data cables. Actually, let's do our SATA real quick because we do need to do that so we don't forget. So we're going to flip this around. Okay, and that's this random one here, okay? And that's going to supply power to our fans and pump in particular. Okay, so we're just going to grab this. Again, SATA is slotted. Okay, it almost looks like a little bit of an L. Okay, so you got like a little slot right here, so make sure that you line that up. This is for SATA power. So we're lined up like this. And I should be able to, there we go. And that's connected. And of course, if you're dealing with SSDs, you would be using a lot of SATA because that's what it's going to take. But being we're using M.2, that's why I hate using this cable, because one of the beautiful parts of M.2 is it gets its power from the PCIe lane that it goes into, as well as transfers its data. So there's 2 less cables that you have to hook up. If I was using a traditional SSD, I'd have to have SATA power and SATA data. Okay, but unfortunately, or luckily, I don't have to do that. But unfortunately, I have this. Okay, we also have this USB. Okay, and that USB is specifically for this water cooling. Again, this is why I usually like air cooling, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of pop this in. And if I remember right, there's a USB right where that other one was. So I'm going to feed that into the bottom. And then we're going to flip it over again. And if I'm correct, yes, there's a USB right next to the other one. So I'm going to kind of feed this guy in a little bit. And we're not using any other USB 2 port because we have USB 3 in the front. So USB, to make sure we see that. USB 2, how I know USB 2 is, let's see, focus. Okay. I look at this, there's one blank pin. Okay. So you've got holes, but then you have a blank pin. Okay. So basically your blacked out pin is going to go with, on the spot down here, you'll see that there's one pin missing. Okay. So we're going to plug it in to pin missing to pin missing. So pin missing is bottom here. So I'm just going to put it in. The biggest problem with USB 2 that you just want to be careful of is that when you plug it in, just make sure you're not missing any pins. Okay, meaning that you kind of set it off slightly. You couldn't set it off to the left because that's where the missing pin is, but you could set it to the right slightly off. So just be careful of that. Okay, so now basically we are close to done with the major cabling. Still have the video card, which is a big one, but we're done with most of the cabling. So really the only thing we have left now is all of our front panel headers. So we've got to do the power button. We've got to do the power LED, HD LEDs. Sometimes they have. Sometimes there's a reset switch we might have to do. We're going to have to do the USB-C that's in the front and also the USB 3. Okay. So what I'm going to do is grab these cables and then we're going to start feeding those through. But actually first, I want to look. USB-C right there. Okay, so I know I need to feed that in probably. I'm going to feed that in through here. Our front panel connectors is the bottom right. So that's going to be the front panel down here. And I'll zoom in and I'll show you when I do that. And then, so that's going to be all of our buttons and LEDs, USB-C, and then I need a USB 3. And our USB 3 is, let's look where you are. Aha, right here, which is unusual. It's sideways. Usually you see it facing up, so that's an unusual design, which might actually be better. Be very careful with USB 3 because they often it's such, and maybe that's why they did this sideways. When they're down like this, it's such a tight connection that if you're like, oh, I want to move this, often the plastic will come off with it. So I'd always say when you do USB 3, do it once. Don't keep trying again. Okay, so I'm going to start routing cables through. Okay, so what I've done is I've basically just gone and went through the back and just kind of popped all the cables up where they need to go. There's one that I forgot to mention that is important. I mean, not everybody uses it, but can see in the bottom left, okay, right down here, that is going to be your front panel audio. And again, that's this cable right here, and that is marked by a second blacked out pin, okay? And so the missing pin is going to line up to that. So that's your microphone jack and your headphone jack in the front of the computer or the top of the computer. So we're going to line up missing pin to missing pin and reach in here. And this angle with the camera is a little tough. There we go. Okay. So it's in. Okay. Be also a little careful because, again, these sometimes can get in a situation where you're slightly off. You can't go slightly off to the left, but you could to the right. Okay. Okay. So that's in. So now let's do our USB 3 because we're right here. So USB 3 is going to be right there. Okay. And I'm going to grab this. Here's my USB 3. This has a little bit of a notch, okay? And there's a notch cut out. So I'm just going to place that in. And again, you want to be nice and straight with this because these will break. I should just be able to, I'm going to hold, see this design. I'm not sure I like their new design because I feel like I'm adding a little undue pressure. There we go. And it snaps in, okay? This feels like it's got a lot of strain right there. So again, I think I really enjoy maybe the top down a little bit more. But one nice part about the USB-C, okay, is this is very easy, okay? So that is just going to plug in. It goes either direction. So I really like the new design, okay? And that just plugs in like this. And actually it is not, it is a single direction. Okay, so this goes in. Boom, and here a nice click, okay? So again, that was USB-C right there, okay? So it's in. Now, the only thing we have left is the front panel connectors. This, unfortunately, is one of the more tedious things in computer building. Not hard, just tedious, because I've got to plug little pins right there, okay? And you just have to have, so basically what you have to do is as you do this is know where everything goes, okay? So I can see here, and actually, oh, one last piece, not before the front panel headers. This is just a fan. This is from the fan hub. So we need to plug this into an open fan, and I just happen to have open fans right here. So we're just going to plug it in, and it's got a little slide, and that's it. Okay, so for the front panel header, this is where your instruction guide will be incredibly helpful. So even though this is a horrible instruction guide, at least we have this, okay? Now, the only thing that's a little unusual is the way they show this. Notice it's got the missing pin here. So understand how this goes, you really need to hold it sideways, okay? Because the missing pin, you look over here, the missing pin is the top right, okay? So that's the orientation. And that's the other thing that sometimes people get a little bit strange with is when you look at this, is that they go sideways. They don't go vertical, okay? They go horizontal. So the HD LED, your plus and minus goes here. Power LED, plus and minus goes there. If you do not have a plus and minus on it, then look for the arrow, okay? And I will show you the arrow, because the arrow will indicate that. I've also got an additional light, because this is one of those areas, especially as we make gaming cases, they get so dark that it's hard to actually see everything that's, you know, inside, because they're trying to kind of have it be cool for gaming. So I'm gonna pop these up right here, and then I'll lay this. You can do it laying down. I tend not to. I like to do it vertically, okay? So you can see these are my, right here, these are labeled power LED, plus and minus, power switch. And if I turn this over and say the power switch, you can see the arrow right there, okay? So the arrow is going to indicate, so basically if it says like G and D, which would be ground, the arrow is going to be the opposite of that, okay? So just kind of know that if there's a spot for a G and D, then place that in the opposite side. These are clearly marked plus and minus. Okay, I'm going to plug these in according to my map, and I'll be back. Okay, so you can see, I'll shine a little light, and this is what, so I actually bring, this is just a little light, super handy because this is magnetic. And so basically I can put this on the side of the case and I can lean in, okay? Be careful you don't scratch the case, but this becomes very, very handy to do that. Just make sure also the magnet stays away from some sensitive parts, but anywhere you have metal on the side of the case is quite nice. So I'm gonna set this up so we can see a little bit. And let's zoom in here. Let's see if it's too zoomed. Okay, so you can see these are plugged in. Now, this is, I mean, I'm saying this is tedious. This only took me about 30 seconds. But for your first time building, this can be a little bit much. Just make sure the pins are all the way in, okay? That's important. And then this one doesn't have any on the bottom, but if it does, like this, one of the ones on the bottom is often your hard drive LED. This doesn't have a hard drive LED, but plug your bottom in before your top. It's just kind of a rule of thumb, because if you plug your top in first, it's very hard to reach back here. Okay, so plug your bottom rail in and then plug your top in. Okay, and that's it. Now, sometimes, again, little cables, very easy to do, but can be detrimental if it's not done right, because one is your power switch. And if you don't have that connected right, then you'll turn on your computer, wait for it to go. You're so excited, and nothing happens because your power switch is not connected right. One trick is you can take a flat screwdriver, okay, which is kind of a great little tool. If it's before you think the power supply or anything else, go easy and just touch every two together. So you're literally just taking this and you're touching every two together. And what that'll do is actually close the circuit. And if that's the power button, it turns on. So then you can go, oh, I put it in the wrong place, or possibly, you have a damaged wire or something, okay? But just use that trick. And I've actually had to use that a lot of times, especially on builds where there's no power supply manual or anything else. And those cables have fallen out or whatever. Can you have a bad power switch? Yes, but it's rare. Okay, that is all of the cables, sans the video card or graphics card, both synonymous with each other, okay? The GPU is housed in the graphic card or video card. So we still need to install that, and we need to install power. And then we're gonna start turning this thing on. Okay, so we've got all cabling done. So now we have, if we look at our cabling, we've got our two 8-pin CPU pins in, and we have our water cooling totally hooked up. So this is our pump up on top here. You can see the pump. This is our two fans that'll help draw the air, so the air should go up and out, coming in from the front and out to the back and out to the front. We have a RAM installed. We have our pump hooked up to the CPU fan slot. Then we also have the fans themselves going to a SATA cable in the back. We've got our 24-pin ATX power supply. We have our USB-C plugged in. We have our USB 3.0 plugged in. We have all our bottom connectors, our front audio panel connected. We have that very strange new one, that PCI Express extra power for the motherboard, which again is not normal on most boards. And again, you do not have to plug it in unless you're running a heavy load. We're just gonna have it plugged in because it should also not hurt. We also have the USB cable, and that's specifically for the water cooling. So that's a USB 2 plugged in. Plus we have our front panel connector. Plus we have an extra fan connector, and that fan connector is coming in for all of the case fans. The next thing we have to do is install the graphics card. So we're going to get our graphics card here, our 570, and we're going to take it out of the box. Okay, one of the first things we see in the box is this connector. So this is your 12VH PWR, and this goes into two 8-pins PCIe. So this is basically a converter that comes with it because it comes with this new 600-watt cable. We're not going to use this because we already have from our newer power supply a connection for this. So we're not going to put that. And here's our graphics card. Make sure that when you buy these graphics cards that you look and see that it's going to fit in your case. This will easily fit in this case, but we do need to be careful, okay? Now, we also have this piece right here, and that's a protective piece, so you need to make sure you take that off. Now, what I highly suggest on nice custom builds like this, it's not such a big deal, but I highly suggest we do what's called a dry run, meaning I'm just gonna kind of line this up, and I'm going to see, and we need to watch that USB-C cord because that's kind of in our way, that it's gonna go right about here. The reason I'm doing this is because I've got to take off these front panel, or excuse me, I've got to take off these back panel connectors. On this, that's no big deal because I can take these off, and I notice this is going to cover two. So that's not a big deal. I can take that off, but a lot of times in your cheaper cases, these are just spot welded on, which means that you flip back and forth and then they just pop off. Well, if you accidentally take the wrong ones out, you're going to have a problem because you can't put them back. Okay, and that just helps control dust and things like this. So we need to take off these two. And I'm just loosening those because these are thumb screws. And we're going to twist them off. They come out like that. So on all PCIe cards now, PCIe slots for your graphics card, they've got this clip. And what happens is when it goes in and fits in, this will come up. It's important to know this because if I'm going to take the graphic card out, make sure you reach behind the graphic card and flip this down before pulling out. The whole idea is that it helps hold it in place. So we need to make sure that we always do that first. Okay, one thing to look before you put on a graphics card is if you have any, a lot of times they'll have protective covering. If it has protective covering, now's the time to take it off, because if you wait to take it off, then it's very hard to get off later. Strangely, this does not have any, and most do, so that's unusual. Okay, and I say this doesn't have any, but it does. It has a very thin film that's actually on these fans. Usually there's a film all over this, but we're gonna go ahead and take this off now because once this gets going, as it gets older and everything else, this will start peeling and this could get into things. So we're just gonna go ahead and you're just gonna have to gently kind of pry with your fingernails, try not to scratch anything, and take off these thin pieces of plastic. Because again, there's nothing wrong with keeping this on, although if it's completely has the film everywhere, then yes, you want to take it off. But it's a good idea to take these off now because you're going to forget about them. Also, don't forget, take off the cover. We do not want our fingerprints on this. If for some reason you get a fingerprint or this is marred, then you're going to want to take isopropyl alcohol, ideally 99%, with a Q-tip and just kind of clean this off. So we don't want any grease in this. It's going to have a lot of electricity flowing. So I'm going to take it like this. I'm going to arrange this to go in, and I basically just, it's going to sit right on top. Okay, once I know that this is clearly on top and basically fully in the slot, so I haven't pushed down yet, but I just want to make sure that's in the slot well, you just push down. And you can hear that click, and we are now in. So that bottom clip that I just showed you popped back up, okay? So now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna go ahead and put the screws back in these two holes here to hold it. And I give these are thumb screws, so we can just kind of make these hand tight as they were. So video cards installed. So a lot of times these video cards are so heavy that what you actually will have is another stand, and that'll help hold it up. This does not have it because this is not as large as, frankly, I thought it would be, especially for a 5070. So we still have to do the power. So we need to run that power. So let's flip it over and run the power up through. Okay, so I've ran the power through the bottom. This has a insert. So in these new plugs, you'll see this has a bottom piece down here. This has a bottom piece here. So I need to make sure when I plug it in, the clip should go up on top, and this bottom area here should go into there. So this is where, again, remember, these are the ones that catch on fire, so we want to make sure that we don't do too tight of a bend on the end. So this is, just goes in like this, okay? And we don't want this to be too tight, okay? So don't make this at an angle too tight. Instead, it needs to be more rounded, okay? Because that's what is causing the melts and the fires. So that is nice and in there. And we're ready to turn this thing on. Okay, so we're getting ready to turn it on, and basically I have the back cover closed up. We still have to go through and do a lot of cable management right here, but you can see that this is all, again, a little cable management in, but it's all ready to go. So we're going to press the button on this. Okay, notice beautiful front, and I'll show you when it's all said and done. So you need to press the button. Now, I've got all the cables hooked up in the back. Common, what happens is, remember, this is a brand new power supply. So it often comes in the off position. Remember, that's a 0 or off in binary, and that's a 1. So you need to make sure that you actually turn the power supply on. That actually happens a lot. People like press a button and go, oh no, nothing's happening. This, by the way, this on off is a power saving mode. So if you turn it on, the fan doesn't spin. If you turn it off, the fan will spin more. Okay, so we're back to the button. Press the button. We see a nice light up, so that means our front panel's working. At least those. We still need to test this, and we still need to test that. Easy way that I usually test the front USB is that's how I'll install Windows. Okay, so let's look inside the computer. We can see here we have a nice display. Liquid's running at 21. One of the things I want to check is I want to check fan. Is the fan working? I can hear it. Okay, so this is important to make sure all our fans. Let's check our front fans. Good. Okay, so all of our fans are working. Everything seems to be loaded up. And so now we can watch, that's our post. So basically you have to watch your colors, and now we should be able to see a screen. So you can tell right here, we have loaded up into BIOS, okay, or in particular UEFI. So this is a little different, and we've got quite a few things going on. So one of the first things that actually I want to do is I want to look at what I see fans. So we only see 2 fans. If you look on the bottom right, you only see 2 fans. The reason we only see 2 fans is because, remember, we only have 2 plugged in. So that CPU fan is actually going to be the pump on the water cooling. And then the sysfan 4, that's all 3 case fans because we're going through a fan header. Remember, that's why I said it's one kind of problem with it. We can see our core temperature is showing 50 on the processor. That is not what is matching on the front of this, but that's actually what's measured on the actual CPU itself. So 50 idle is a little warm, but hopefully as we get this going, we'll see those temperatures drop a little bit. 4.2, we see both slots of RAM showing up, 32 gigs each. So that's great. And we can see the motherboard, and let's look at that motherboard version, because often we can see the BIOS build date is 9/12/2024. So this BIOS is already quite a bit out of date. Normally, I would say you don't need to update your BIOS. In fact, I used to say that 15, 20 years ago, unless there's a problem. Today, unfortunately, you need to update your BIOS. So I'm going to go to the motherboard manufacturer site, and I'm going to find the motherboard, and I'm going to see what the BIOS version is here, and then I'm going to go ahead and download the new version, and we're going to flash this before we change any settings. So in order to get the BIOS update, we need to go to Google, and you need to type in exactly what your motherboard is. So for us, it's an MSI Pro X870-P Wi-Fi. And make sure you type it exactly in as it is. Okay, and then once you type that in, it should come up with the results, whether it's ASUS, GIGABYTE, MSI, whoever your manufacturer is. Of course, this is for a custom build. So once we see that, we're just going to merely click the link to go to it. Once you're on there, ideally it should be something called like support. So you're going to click on support, and this is where your downloads, drivers and downloads is going to be super important to get. and also your BIOS. So we're on BIOS already, and we're going to see there's a BIOS version. We can see the release date. Ideally, you don't want it too soon to when we're going to have it, and then we merely click download. Now, what else we need to do is look at the drivers. So we need to see what drivers we need. The AMD chipset driver, the Intel chipset driver, always want to grab that. So we're going to go ahead and start getting some of the drivers that we need to. AMD graphics drivers. So basically go through and make sure that you can download all of these as well. So if you download the Ethernet drivers, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi drivers, all of the ones that we'll need just to be ready, we're going to install these after we install Windows. The RAID driver we're not going to download because we're not setting for RAID. And of course, make sure you have the correct operating system. We have to install BIOS first, and all these drivers we're going to install after. This is a firmware for optical drive not detected in BIOS. We don't have an optical drive. The MSI setter, you can download that if you want. Everybody has their own. A lot of these are just added on. CPU-Z, you can get yourself. You don't necessarily have to download that. So remember, order of operations is first, we're going to flash the BIOS. Then we're going to install Windows. After we install Windows, then we're going to go ahead and load up all the drivers. Now, in order to install Windows, while we're at it, we're going to go to Rufus. It's rufus.ie. It's in Ireland. There's lots of other ways to go ahead and make a bootable USB. Personally, I love Rufus. I use it a lot. Rufus is just an easy way to make a Windows bootable, a Linux bootable. It's very, very versatile. So you just go to rufus.ie, and then once you're here, Rufus, we're going to download Rufus. Be careful on the Rufus page. There's lots of ones, advertisements are unfortunately. You've got two Rufuses. I use the P, that's portable, which just means that you can download it, run it, and throw it out. If you do the regular 4.7 or whatever version executable that's not marked P, the standard, then that'll actually install. But if you're going to install a lot, then go ahead and do that. So in order to make the Windows, first you need to download an ISO of your Windows. That's super important, and there's many ways to get that. It should auto-detect your drive. If you have multiple drives, make sure that you know which one's in, because this is destructive. This will erase your flash drive. You are dedicating it to become a bootable disk. And then we're going to find our Windows that we downloaded. And again, you can download Windows ISOs just fine. What you need to make sure, though, is that you have a key. The key is what you can't just use from anybody, okay? So once you download your ISO, this is the newest, 24H2. 24 means it came out in 2024. H2 means it came out in the second half. That's the new versioning of Windows. So we're going to have all this. Most of it is pretty smart. So you want GPT. We don't want MBR. We want UEFI. That's important. And so most of this default is going to be good. Now we're going to leave it as the default. For Linux, sometimes you might want to change things. And again, if we do MBR, then it's going to switch to BIOS. But we don't want that because that's going to limit the amount of partitions that we can have. And GPT is standard now and frankly better. So we're going to mark GPT. And we're going to want UEFI. If I want to recover this, I can put the flash drive back in. I can say non-bootable. If I make it non-bootable, then I can put it back to a normal flash drive. So if you don't want to dedicate a flash drive, it's always good to have a flash drive with Windows on. But basically, I make it non-bootable, put the disk in, and then that way it's going to go ahead and change it. You know, NTFS, you can make it FAT32, which is the default, which are the most common. exFAT's great, because if you exFAT, then you can have over 4 gig files. Okay, so that's super nice, and we can sit there and say the volume label, put it back to what you want. Okay, so that's if you want to go ahead and make it that. But we're going to go ahead and create a bootable Windows. So we leave all this the same. the default, because usually that's pretty good. Okay, we click start. This is something that Rufus does to try to go around some of the Windows 11 requirements. So the first one's remove the requirement 4 gig, secure boot, TPM2. That's what's made a lot of computers not be able to install Windows 11. I highly suggest you don't do this. There's a reason why you want secure boot, and the TPM that does a lot of your encryption, especially for Windows Hello. While you can make an old computer run Windows 11, Microsoft's actively getting around that. The other, the remove requirements for an online Microsoft account, that's kind of a pain. It's a running game right now with Microsoft. They really want you to use a Microsoft account, and there's a lot of benefits, and I would actually suggest doing it. That being said, when you're building for someone else, that makes it incredibly hard because you don't know their Microsoft account information, nor do you want to, okay? So, I'll often leave this checked. It sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. The basic thing is to get around this, don't. And so when you go into the boot and ask for the Wi-Fi password, or you have an Ethernet plugged in, don't. When you install Windows, leave the Ethernet unplugged and do not connect to your Wi-Fi network. If you do that, it'll allow you to create a local account. And that's really, I still like a local account, and then I add on a Microsoft account. And this is really because dealing with clients, again, I don't want to use the online Microsoft account. Disable data collection, let's skip the privacy questions. This is huge. Basically, when you install Windows by default, the privacy questions, it's kind of funny they name it privacy questions. It actually means that you have no privacy. So this will turn that off, which is good. Otherwise, when you install, you can just flip all of them off. And BitLocker automatic device encryption, really good idea to do, and you should probably do it. But if you lose any of your keys from BitLocker or anything else, it's going to be a problem. Once it does this, it's going. And it's telling you right now it's going to delete everything on this drive. So we press OK, and it starts going. And this will take a couple of minutes. So just sometimes what it'll do is it'll hang. All done, it'll come back and say ready. Make sure that you don't accidentally press start again, because if you press start again, you're going to be waiting a couple minutes again for this to finish. And again, a couple of minutes could be upwards of 5 minutes. It really depends. It'll seem like it hangs sometimes at 80 or 90 or 95% for a while. It's just decompressing and extracting lots of files in order to set this up. But you don't want to, when it says ready, again, you don't want to click start again because it will start the whole thing up. Now, normally when I put in the flash drive, you can throw it into any USB port. But in this one, it's got a special one for flash BIOS. So we're going to go ahead and insert it there. Okay, so on the front page here, and a lot of times every single BIOS UEFI is going to look slightly different. So don't be afraid to go and explore and kind of look to see where everything's at. You can always look in forums and stuff for this. But we can see right here that this says M-Flash. So we're going to click on M-Flash. Okay, so it says System will auto reboot, and this is going to reboot. The reason is because often it has to reboot in order for it to be able to read and go into the flash mode, to be able to read the actual flash drive. Okay, it is loaded, so it's rebooted, and sometimes it takes a sec to reboot. Just give it a sec. It is also normal on a lot of drives, especially with DDR5, for the first boot to take a while. And this is called training the RAM. And in fact, it might still happen once you make configuration. We still need to go into BIOS and configure quite a few things, but for right now, there's no reason to start making setting changes in BIOS because it'll all go away once we flash. So you can see my disk, make sure that's correct. There is the directory for it. So I'm going to go in here. Here is the BIOS version. And again, you want to make sure that this is correct. It says, are you sure to select this file? Yes. Now, it feels like it's frozen because it doesn't do anything, but right now what is happening is it's reading. And then it has BIOS is updating. And this is extremely important. You do not want to lose anything at this point, meaning ideally you should have this hooked up to UPS now at this point, because you do not want any electricity to die, the battery die, or anything else, because this is a critical step. So go ahead and relax for a sec, and we'll be back to see this done. Okay, so the first thing that we see is this performance preset. We have the auto and enable. Notice it does talk about that if you change any of this, you can have problems. Okay, so we're back on. So a couple things that we need to do. So now we've updated our BIOS and it's working well. So we need to go ahead and do a couple things like fix the time, because right now the time is incorrect. So I'm going to click on this, and right now the current date is the 29th, and the time is 11:37 a.m. So we're going to change this, and again, just to let you know, if you watch, we're going to go 11, 12. This does go military time, okay? So we are 11:37. So that's perfect, and it is Thursday, May 29th as of this filming. So now we press OK. And it's always good to have the system clock set. Fan forming, temperature, so we can have Celsius and Fahrenheit. It's a good idea to actually keep this on Celsius, because that is how most things actually work. So let's look at a couple of things. Memory, we need to change this. So we have an expo setting. The expo is going to be for AMD. You're going to use XMP settings for Intel, and earlier DOCP for older AMDs. So we definitely want that on, okay? Some other things we might try, Precision Boost Overdrive, we're gonna leave that on, auto. The gaming mode disabled, detection enabled is fine. The MSI driver install, we're gonna actually go ahead and put disabled. Yes, you can have it automatically installed, but going to the website and downloading the drivers fresh is usually better. Also, a lot of these manufacturers will try to add on a couple of freeware versions of things. So we're going to manually do that, okay? And everything else looks good. This is something that's new. So this is for AI processing. We're not going to do that right now. If we look up here, a hardware monitor, this is always good to see. So this is going to kind of show us our fans going right here. It's going to show us, you know, this is basically what is the fan ramp, so I can change this. If I think it's getting too warm, I can increase the fans and such. Okay, so that's always nice to see. And performance preset, we're not going to mess with any of these, but we are going to go into advanced for a couple different things. So I can see here, M.2, I can see my 4 terabyte M.2 NVMe right there, so that's perfect. Everything looks good. My motherboard, 37 degrees, looks pretty good. The CPU 47, we'll see how this goes once we get everything tuned for that. And then over here, let's look at advanced. Most of this we don't need to change. Make sure we're on UEFI for BIOS. That's what we should be booting with right now. The driver installer, again, we've got that off. Overclocking, we are not going to overclock. The only thing we are overclocking is our RAM right here, okay? And Expo is enabled. And it says 5200, which is perfect because that is reading the speed of what we bought. So that looks good. Security, you can set up an administrator password or not. That's up to you. I usually don't for a personal computer. If this is any sort of business environment, that's a good idea to do. Secure boot is enabled. That is something that Windows likes to have. Boot itself, full screen logo display. Now, I personally turn this off. This is where you get the big GIGABYTE or MSI or Dell. What it does is hides post. Post is really important because post is going to basically say, hey, you've got a problem. Your RAM's not. It would technically stop if you had no RAM, but say one stick is bad. It'll still go through post and say you're good to go. You want to see that because a lot of times a RAM stick might be bad. You'll boot into Windows and you never know, especially with something like this with 64 gigs of RAM. It'll show in post going, nope, I see this RAM stick, I see this RAM stick. So we're going to go ahead and disable that so we can see post. The order looks good, UEFI hard disk. Okay, so you can see what are we going to boot from. We're going to actually have to go in and change this to a UEFI USB. Okay, and the reason is because that's what we'll boot from. In order to make Windows, we've got to put it in a bootable disk. So, but for now, we can change that later. UEFI CD, that doesn't really matter because we're not using that. Okay, so boot looks pretty good. So we're going to go to Save Changes and Exit. And this will tell us real quick to make sure that our RAM is working well, which it should be. And then after this, we're ready to start installing Windows. Okay, now we're going to actually install Windows in our machine. So the first thing to do is we're going to turn it on, and then we're going to go into BIOS again. And we're going to just basically change, here's the boot priority. So you can see here, UEFI, we can see our SanDisk right there. So I'm just going to move that to the front. And then I should be able to just get out of here. And that's exit. And this is just redoing where we're loading from. And that's perfect. So now we're going to load from the USB drive that we made. Okay, so Windows is loaded up. I'm going to go here and we're going to eject the drive. Okay. Now we do need to go ahead and connect this to the internet. And let's look at, we're going to do a Windows pause break. This shows us kind of everything that's in here. Graphics card, installed, processor, all of that great stuff. So we can see that. We can make sure that's activated. We can click on this and it says can't connect. Okay, so that is common because it doesn't have the internet. So we do want to make sure we look at that. But the very first thing we should do in Windows pause break here, or I can merely right click and go straight to Device Manager. I've always done Windows pause break because this has been around since Windows 95. And it shows us all of our stuff. We got 64 gigs of RAM, shows us just, you know, the Ryzen 7, 64-bit. It's just a lot of good information here. And then also rename this PC, which I often do. So we're going to now go to Device Manager and look at all these yellow exclamation points. And that is because we've got a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of drivers. We have a whole bunch of drivers that need to be installed. And this is really, really common. Okay. And that's a little odd that it's I did safely eject that, but if you ever see that, that's usually because it was not safely ejected. So we're going to close this for now. And we're going to open this. And I'm going to grab all of these things. These are all the drivers and programs that I needed to download. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to start installing all of the drivers. You can see this beautiful install. This is a mesh case, which just lets you see inside. No RGB, because this doesn't need RGB. It's nice and clean. Beautiful front. Sticker right there, which is always nice just to see what's going on. Solid on that.